Thank you, Jeff, of course, for hosting us, but even more important for your really long-standing support for innovation in education. I mean, that is not a part where we should pride ourselves. If you think about the health sector spending 15, 16, 17 times as much on innovation as the education sector, I think there's really something that we need to push a lot harder than we currently do. And I do think the project on creative thinking is just a great example of how to do this. And what I particularly value of your work, and I really want to thank you all for this, is this doesn't sort of talk just about issues around curriculum design. How do we define creativity? How do we embed it in the instructional kind of curriculum? But it talks about implementation. It started not out with a definition, it started out with rubrics. How do we actually observe creativity in the classroom? How do we actually make it amenable to teaching so that those ideas actually take root in practice? And I think this is exactly where the world needs to go, where we need to make progress. But so it's important that we see work on new skills in the broader context. If you think where the future of education lies, in the past, sorting was enough. We only needed a few people to drive our economies, and everybody works for those people. In the future, we need everybody on board. We need to understand how different people learn differently and engage with that diversity so much more creatively. But then the second part is the part of your agenda now. The kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, have become easy to digitize, to automate. The future is with the capacity of people to think for themselves, work with others. Very, very different kind of skill set. I'm going to come back to this. And of course, that requires a very different approach to learning, the learning environments. Everybody who has a 3-year-old at home will know with the enormous creativity humans are born. I mean, there is so much potential in people. And in education, we can either develop this, foster it, or limit it, contain it, making people compatible with established ways of thinking. We're very, very good in helping people transmit our wisdom of our times to the next generation. We're not very good in helping people question the established wisdom of our times. And that's really, I think, very important, requiring a very, very different learning environment, very different caliber of teachers. And of course, people who are creative knowledge workers, the teachers, designers, architects, mentors, coaches, they don't like to work in factories. That's part of the problem of our systems, that actually our systems often drive out those teachers that want to be creative designers. And of course, it has to do with the way we think about, accountability, moving information upwards. That's easy, but actually the more important part is about moving information sideways. We are and this is sort of symptomatic of education. We are quite good in pushing ideas into, schools and classrooms. We know how to do this. There's a big kind of machinery behind this. We're not very good in finding really, really good ideas in the classroom and scaling them and spreading them and sharing them across the systems. Kind of this, and I think actually this is exactly where the value of your project lies, in my view. But I think Jeff has already mentioned those big trends. We have now more broadband connections in the OECD than we have people, and that has fueled the rise in artificial intelligence on almost an exponential scale. And that rise in artificial intelligence pushes us to think much harder about what makes us human, so that we complement the artificial intelligence with human qualities and not substitute it. The Industrial Revolution has sort of taught us how to educate second-class robots. We know how to do that well. In the time of artificial intelligence, what it means to educate first-class humans, I think and this is not just about creativity. I think there are many dimensions come to this that we need to think harder. If you look at 15-year-olds on the PISA test, the majority of 15-year-olds in virtually every country say they feel really bad if they're not connected. Being part of this digital world is like breathing air and drinking water for young people these days. And if you think about digitalization more broadly, it's incredibly democratizing. Everybody can participate, collaborate, contribute. But it's also concentrating power at a rate that we have never seen before. It's incredibly particularizing. The smallest voice can be heard everywhere. You post something on Twitter and everybody can, follow you. But it's also homogenizing, squashing individuality, cultural uniqueness. It's actually questions around identity are coming to the forefront in this digital world that sort of puts everything together. Digitalization is incredibly empowering. Jeff has made that point really well. The most successful companies these days start with a big idea, not with a big industry. They have the product before they have the money. That's the new world. With an idea, you can change the world. You don't need a lot of money. You don't need a lot of resources. The best place to see this is right here in London. But let's not forget, and Jeff, you've made this point as well, digitalization can be incredibly disempowering when we become the slaves of some algorithm that tells us where to turn left and right or how we feel. If technology understands our own feelings and emotions and well-being better than we do, we have a problem. I think we need to think much harder again about those human qualities. And where you end up on this slide has a lot to do with what we do in education. We shouldn't underestimate this. And neuroscience tells us that actually many of the answers come in the very first years of life. A lot of things that we think are personality traits, people are very creative or very empathic, are actually skills for young people. There's enormous opportunity that we have to change the world with education. If you look at the world of work, routine tasks are disappearing. Technology-intensive tasks are increasing. You put the piece together and you see the future of work. Now, we know pretty well the kind of skills that will be driving the future of work. And what is very clear is that nobody will accept to have their job stolen by a robot if they don't feel prepared for the next one, to create a new one or to get a new one. This sense of preparedness, am I ready for the new world, is I think a key predictor for the future success of our societies. Will we see growing disenfranchisement? I think that's going to be a big question. You can see that with data, we lose manual skills, obviously, because robots are running whole factories now, but actually the steepest decline is not on the manual side, it's on the routine cognitive side. That is a dilemma for education. The things that we know how to do best are disappearing fastest. Now, if you look at the rise in skills, you can see sort of non-routine analytic skills, solving complex problems. This is also where creativity really comes in, but I encourage you to also look at the green line. That's about social skills. Can you work with people who think differently than you, who come from different ways of thinking, different cultures? That is going to be a big differentiator in the future. Actually, the power of computers, the power of artificial intelligence is not your personal mobile phone or your computer, but it's the capacity of technology to build huge, gigantic networks to share ideas. As humans, we are not very good at that. And part of this is how we educate people. We talk about collaboration in every school curriculum, but then we put students behind individual desks, and at the end of the school year, we ask them to do a test where they have to show they're better than their neighbor. That's the reality. So there's a big gap between what the world needs and what our education systems are designed for. And these trends are continuing. The biggest risk to education is not about inefficiency. We can talk about this for a lot. Last week, we launched our Education at a Glance. We spent a lot of money, even more money now than 10 years ago, and things don't improve. Now, there's a big productivity problem. But the biggest challenge is that education is losing its relevance. That's why people leave. And you can actually see this very nicely in our survey of adult skills, where we tested the skills of people. This is basically the capacity of people to sort of manage complex information. And then we asked, a simple question. What if we gave that test that adults do to a computer of, medium range kind of capacities? And this is where computers are coming up. Actually, again, those kinds of tools that we have focused much of our education on are now being outsourced to artificial intelligence and digitalization. That's the reality, and it should push us to think about areas where we as humans are still competitive. Again, think about this. 10 years ago, we all got those smartphones that changed everything, bringing knowledge from a few monopolies to the fingertips of everyone. Then, the virtual world and the real world became to sort of integrated, harder to distinguish, and everybody got connected. But while some things got easier, a lot of things got a lot harder. Think about literacy. In the past, literacy was about extracting knowledge from established text. And if you didn't know the answer, you look it up in an encyclopedia and you can trust the answer to be true. All straightforward. It's about teaching techniques. Today, you look up a question on Google and you get 50,000 answers, and nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge. Literacy is about constructing knowledge. No? And that has a lot to do with our capacity to think creatively, no? To think divergently. And again, the social media are great, they connect everybody, but the reality is it's actually harder for young people to engage with the diversity of societies, no? Because these social media link you to people who think like you, who look like you, who walk like you, and it's actually much harder for young people to appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of walking. No? And again, that has a lot to do with creativity, our capacity to think out of the box, to connect with ideas that are unfamiliar to us. No? So again, some things that used to be easy have become really, really difficult in the digital world. No? And the reality of school life is a great example. In the past, what your children learn in school was carefully digested by experts, by governments. Before you print a school book, thousands of people have reviewed it and so on. What you watch on television has been digested by journalists. You can mostly trust them too. Today, everything is dumped on people. And they need to find their way through this. That is, I think, the new world in which we live. And some people have called this a race between education and technology. Before the great industrial revolution, neither technology nor education made much of a difference for the majority of people. But the industrial revolution changed everything, moving technology ahead of people. And it caused a huge amount of social pain for those who lived through those times, because people were not prepared for those times. But, then we invented universal kind of schooling, making people compliant with the norms of the industrial society. No? That was what we did really well. That was our school systems have done. It's created generations of prosperity. People who can work predictable on machines and so on have been very successful. But today we see this exactly same pattern. No? You can see the technology racing ahead of the skills of people. And again, you have young people with university degrees finding difficulties on the work market. No? And at the same time, employers say they cannot find the people with the skills they need. So again, this kind of signals that we're not ready for the world of tomorrow. And the question I think we have to ask ourselves is really, how do we move people again ahead of the equation? I think your work is at the heart of this. Creative thinking and critical thinking are not everything, but they are at the heart of this. Now, without those kinds of tools, young people will not be able to have that kind of compass and the navigation tools to find their way in an increasingly volatile world. In a way, you can see knowledge is expanding massively and rapidly, and it is filled with so many ideas and facets. And they always come with people. We should never forget that. It's not that knowledge, just dumping information on people in education. Education is a very relational experience. Some people say artificial intelligence will make teachers redundant. Well, it may make instruction, on the delivery of content, redundant. Now, I'm pretty confident that we're going to get today's learning systems are already very powerful. But it will make the work of teachers even more important. Helping young people find their way through this, being a good coach, being a good mentor. Actually, I think it will make the teaching profession a lot more intellectually attractive than it is today. We surveyed teachers in 2018 around the world. And when you actually ask teachers, why did you become a teacher? Most people say, I want to make a difference to the lives of people. In this time of artificial intelligence, for the first time, we can realize that dream, rather than putting teachers to the job of just. But the world of the school is very small. It's a very small box, the curriculum, and of course we try to get everything into this little box. And as we do, the rich facets of our societies often become very shallow shadows of themselves. I'm a scientist by background. I can see this every day. You talk about children in kindergarten, and they love science. It's about experimenting, seeing cause and effect, understanding the nature. And then at age 15, it's become a misery for children. Because we have made science a world of abstract formulas and equations that have nothing to do with scientific inquiry. And the answer is we put more and more things into this box. And that's basically what has made our education systems a mile wide and an inch deep. Now, if you think about, the big world of learning, it's about the realm of human knowledge. It's about, the realm of ethics, judgment. Very important. Artificial intelligence is not a magic power. In fact, it's ethically neutral. It will amplify and accelerate great ideas and will amplify and accelerate very bad ideas. It makes people much, much more central to the equation. The realm of political and civic life is becoming important. We all see that every day in most of our societies. No? The realm of creativity, aesthetics, design, and so on. Those are the dimensions where we need to think harder of how to bring them into school. The OECD sort of underpinning, sort of providing the broader framework for work on creativity and critical thinking. We have designed a learning compass, thinking about the knowledge, the skills, but also the attitudes and values. That's the part that is so difficult to deal with. We try to always put it under the carpet, let somebody else worry about it, parents or society. No. It is the most central part of our school system. We better think about those questions, those core values that are really important in our societies. And if you think about knowledge, it starts, of course, with disciplinary knowledge. How do people get a deep understanding for the ideas of a discipline? But our school systems are very good in misunderstanding that. No? We actually, when we think about knowledge, we think about some content. We add more things, more facets. No? The secret of success is to teach fewer things at greater depths, to help people think like a scientist as opposed to teaching lots of facets of biology and chemistry. Help people think like an historian. Do you understand how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it developed, how it advanced, how it sometimes unravels when the world is changing? What does it mean for the time in which we live today? Thinking like a philosopher. Those are the critical skills. If you do not master those thinking skills, Google is a big trash can for you. You will never be able to find out what the meaning of things is. If you just learn, on the surface, it's not going to help you that much. But our temptation is very, very different. I learned that the hard way in the middle of the financial crisis. People said, well, these days we need to have people who are financially literate. Now, everybody agrees on this. So let's teach financial education in schools. And then, we said, okay, let's test this in PISA. Let's test financial literacy. And my expectation was, where we do financial education, we'll see some improvements in financial literacy. We found no relationship whatsoever between the two things. Who came out on top of the world on financial literacy? The kids in Shanghai in China. They had never heard about financial education. But they understood what the meaning of an exponential function is. They understood the concept of risk, of probability, and when they were given a context on financial education, they applied creative thinking skills to actually find the answer to this. That is why today, I will not make many friends here and not many friends in the UK. We talk about teaching coding in schools. No? What a great idea. It's another way of teaching, people for tomorrow, the skills of today, the tools of today. And I'm not, I'm a great fan of helping people to think, understand the nature of an algorithm, to develop computational thinking. But that's not what you see in coding classes. In coding classes, you see students learning procedures. Again, what we do with trigonometry, with calculus, exactly the same things that we know how to do well. They're not focusing on the ideas of coding, giving people a sense, of the nature of an algorithm, but on the outlets and procedures. And I think this is the risk, that every day there comes something new, we put it on top, and that's what's squeezing out the capacity of teachers to develop creative skills, critical thinking skills, complex problems, because you have to walk through 800 pages of a textbook. So when we talk about knowledge, let's talk about it in its complexity and put the epistemic understanding and reasoning at the core. Can you, think in a discipline? Do you understand the ideas of a discipline as opposed to the facets? And I want to show you some data on this. And it's easy to say everybody sort of likes those kinds of ideas often. And when we ask teachers here in the UK, every teacher said, my role as a teacher is to facilitate students' own inquiry. Or students learn best by finding solutions on their own. Or, you have teachers saying thinking and reasoning is more important than curriculum content. Now you think, oh, we are there. We've done all of that. Wonderful. But the big question is, do teachers do what they say? And actually, when we looked at, the prevalence of memorization if British teachers would do what they say, you would find them at the bottom of the list. You do not do rote learning. But the bottom is already given to, Poland and Switzerland and Poland and Germany. Actually, the UK comes out right on top. There's a big gap between the aspirations, the beliefs of teachers and what is happening in the classroom. This is your task. Not talk about a new curriculum on critical thinking, but it's about changing mindsets, about changing learning environments to create a more enabling kind of condition. Had I asked you at the beginning, who is doing, most rote learning in the world? We have lots of stereotypes about it. We would say, the Japanese or the Chinese or the Singaporeans. But actually, Shanghai and China comes just out in the middle. Yes, they do memorization because memorization can be a very important technique, one of many. But it's not the foundation of learning. In fact, when you ask yourself, who is best on reasoning, deep learning, intrinsic motivation, critical thinking, and so on, you can see they do quite well on this. And that's an area where England has a lot to learn. So think about, when you talk about, creative and critical thinking skills, the instructional system. How do you change the highest point of leverage in an education system is teacher beliefs? How do you change those kinds of mindset? So I think that's a really important point. Why is this important? I always meet some people who say, well, memorization is, you can learn everything by just accumulating knowledge. Well, it's good for some things, but it's actually counterproductive for other things. And I show you something. This chart is a bit complex. When I actually order the PISA tasks in mathematics by their relative complexity, you can see actually for simple tasks, memorization actually helps you with something. But as tasks become more complex, actually memorization is not just neutral, is actually counterproductive. If you believe you can find the answer by remembering it, and the answer requires complex problem-solving skills, you will never find the answer. That's, I think, very, very powerful data. Why is this important? Because the world is moving rapidly from the left to the right side. We don't have much time until computers absorb most of the things on the left side. And what you need, we call it elaboration strategies, but that is essentially about a very important aspect of creating thinking. When you look at your rubrics, there's a lot of commonality between what students need, connecting new knowledge with knowledge that you already have, thinking out of the box, building kind of bridges between different forms of thinking. That is what predicts the performance of people at the high end of the spectrum. So this is why this agenda is so important. A couple of words on the skill dimension. Yes, creative skills, critical thinking skills are at the heart. But we also need to think hard about social and emotional skills these days. Curiosity, courage, leadership, resilience, empathy. Actually, this data have not yet been published, but we're going to do so very soon. And actually, what you're going to see is that those social emotional skills are very important predictors of the environments in which our students learn. You can see the social skills, the creativity, the curiosity, very important drivers for a conducive classroom climate. We put a lot of effort in teacher education on, classroom management. How do you teach discipline and handle kind of problems in the classroom? But actually, at the heart of classroom climate are skills. We need to become more aware of this. You can see the same picture when you look at school bullying. We have a lot of policies in schools in place to, diminish or, prevent bullying at school. Very important. But again, at the heart of this, you can see this is strongly correlated with important dimensions of social and emotional skills. Or, very interesting, closer social networks. I mentioned already how important is our capacity to relate to people who are different from us. Also that is predicted, not just by your cooperative skills, by many dimensions of social and emotional skills. Higher academic aspirations. Same kind of picture. So that is really important. When we looked at this sort of all together, we came up with three kind of big ideas. The first is about, our capacity to, and this is sort of the most intuitive part in the time of artificial intelligence, our capacity to imagine, to create, to build something of intrinsic positive worth. That's why sort of humans, artificial intelligence is great with extrapolating from what we know. It's not great yet in building really new ideas that where humans are important, but also our capacity to mobilize our cognitive, social, and emotional resources. Now, for many problems in the world, we know what to do. We have the skills of solving the problem. Still, we don't do things. This capacity to take action, to bring all of this together is very important. Our capacity to reconcile tensions and dilemmas. Now, the world is no longer black and white. Navigating ambiguity involves a very important aspect of creativity, very important to make things work. And when you think about what this means for pedagogy, openness, once again, we are very good in pushing ideas into the minds of students, the established wisdom of our times. We need to become better at having young people questioning the established wisdom of our times, finding the novelty. Learning is the easy part, but it's actually much harder often for us as humans is to unlearn things and relearn things when the world is changing. To give up some of our beliefs and ideas because we need new ways of thinking. Again, action, mobilizing, and then reflection, stepping back, seeing the bigger picture, the forest among the trees. It's a different kind of mindset, I think, that is very, very important in pedagogy. So if I look at all of this together, it's really about rigor in education, about cognitive demand, making learning interesting for all children, finding learning environments that are much more actively engaging students. We treat students sort of as consumers. That's pretty much the kind of attitude which we have designed our systems. Sort of commodified education. Parents are client, teachers are service providers, students are consumers. And that model will no longer work. Today is about making everybody an active participant in the learning process, having learning environments that are co-created. Focus teaching fewer things at greater depths, I think one of the biggest challenges, but one of the most fundamental ones. A big differentiator of the high performance on our PISA test. Students learn fewer things at greater depths. Coherence, understanding learning progressions. What do humans learn when best? Neuroscience is just at its beginning. Remaining true to the disciplines while encouraging the capacity to help students think across the boundaries of disciplines. Focusing on things which enable students to extrapolate from what they know, apply their knowledge in novel settings. Having learning environments that are thematic, problem-based, project-based, involve co-creation. And then remember that some things are caught, not taught. In fact, you can make that argument about creativity as well. It's a lot to do with how teachers behave, who teachers are, rather than what teachers say to their students. So, and these things, of course, are very, very difficult. And that's really where the book comes in, providing rubrics, providing ideas for make that happen in the classroom. But I think that's really where I hope personally that this project goes next. I think the concepts, you'll never strive for perfection. There will always be an argument what creativity means, and it's probably going to be an evolving concept. In the time of artificial intelligence, our understanding of creativity will perhaps evolve very fast. So let's not, invest too much time for perfection there, but think harder about how to bring those ideas into the behavior and the learning environments, and ultimately the organization of schooling. Thank you very much.